Welcome back to the TEFLology Podcast. In this episode, we bring you an interview with Russell Stannard. Russell Stannard is a multi-award winning educational technologist and founder of teachertrainingvideos.com. He's received awards from the British Council and the University of Westminster, among others, for his work in the use of ICT in education. He's especially known for his work in using technology to enhance feedback and his experiments with screen capture technology. Russell is the author of numerous articles and book chapters on ICT in education, and in this interview he shared some of his insights and ideas with Matt. We hope you enjoy the interview.
Okay, so today I'm speaking to Russell Stannard. Russell, thanks for agreeing to be on the podcast today.
Yeah, no, delighted. Nice to meet you.
Thanks. We usually begin our podcast by asking our interviewees if you could tell us a little bit about your background and maybe particularly how you came to working as an educational technologist, amongst other things, of course.
Okay, well, first started out teaching in Greece. I taught there for a couple of years as an English teacher. I went to Spain. I became the director of International House in Seville. I worked there for about 11 years. Until 1999, and I was kind of beginning to do little bits of publishing work. I was publishing photocopying materials on various books and doing a little bit of work on teachers' books. And I realized that technology was kind of where it was all going, and I was lucky enough to be working with these publishing companies and realizing that quite a lot of them were struggling. So I decided to come back to the UK and do a master's degree in technology. I did multimedia education. And I'm not a natural with technology at all. So it was actually really hard for me. I kind of had to confront the fact that I'm a bit of a technophobe. I did that master's degree, and then it kind of put me in a really good place because I could start to make videos to help teachers to use technology. How that all started was that I write in something called the English Teaching Professional, and I write about the use of technology in language teaching. And I used to get loads and loads of emails from teachers asking me, Russell, how'd you do this? How'd you do that? So I started making the videos. And then in 2017, I decided to put them into teachertrainingvideos.com. So I just come up with the domain name. I started putting all these videos that I'd made into that website. And I was really lucky. The website took off really quickly. I won a pretty big award in 2018 and then a couple more afterwards, including one from the British Council. So it really kind of put me into a situation where I was known for working in that area. And then I guess from that, it just kind of, you're suddenly a specialist in that area, and it's almost like a circle. Companies are contacting you, they're presenting their software. You know, I was working in, and I just got to know more and more different pieces of technology. I'm not a natural with technology at all. Everything I learn, I struggle to learn. I'm not a natural with anything, to be honest with you. I'm not even a natural language learner. I have to work hard at it. But it just built up and up. And then along with the website, I then decided to put the videos on YouTube as well. So I kind of have two places now where you can find my content. Basically, that is on a YouTube channel, and that's really popular. And on my website, which still ticks along. It still gets a couple of thousand visits a day.
Right, okay. What kind of resources and support are provided there? Obviously, it's mainly videos, but what kind of videos do you kind of provide?
Well, what I'm really interested in, first of all, I never, ever work with a company as in they send me their software and they say, Russell, we'll pay you if you make a video. So all the videos are things that I've used or I've looked at and I'm planning on using. Sometimes it is the case that there is a technology that I've come across and I'm thinking, wow, this is brilliant. I'm definitely going to use this. And then I make a set of videos about it. But mainly it's content. Videos are made on things that I have already used myself. So, you know, I'm using technology all the time in my teacher training because I'm not really teaching students anymore. I really only do teacher training now. And I try to be really authentic. So to make videos about things that I have already used. Occasionally, I do show people things I haven't used, but I'm planning on using. And always the message is the same. It's tech help for teachers like myself who are a bit technophobic and want to make use of technology in their teaching and learning. I'm not really interested in people that are good at technology, and a lot of those people know more than I do anyway.
Yeah, it seems like watching your videos, it seems like one of the themes is that you're kind of showing teachers how to kind of exploit kind of freely accessible technology.
Yeah, because I mean, not always, in all honesty. There are a couple of things that I would recommend that teachers actually spend money on, but mainly, yeah, I'm working around technologies that are free because obviously teachers, well, it depends on the country, but teachers aren't that well paid and they're unlikely to spend money on buying software, and you can't blame them for that. So I do try to base it around kind of free technologies if I can, but there are a couple of things that I say, listen, it's really worth buying this.
Yeah. And what's the kind of the profile of your visitors to the page? Where are the teachers based around the world, and do you get that kind of information?
I do sort of to a degree. I mean, obviously the thing is now I'm really, really lucky because I'm doing talks for publishing companies and so I get exposure literally to the whole world. So sometimes I'm doing talks for people in South America. I don't do that much for Japan, in all honesty, but say South America, obviously Europe, Russia, so America. So I do have a bit of information. Funny enough, the majority of people to my website still come from the US. So there's obviously a big kind of interest in educational technology in America, and there's a lot of people from America that follow me. And then the other areas would be India, lots of people from India, so I get lots of emails from India, and of course Europe. And in Europe, it's mainly Italy, which is a country I do a lot of work in, and then Spain and Greece.
Right, I see. Okay. And I guess as we record this at the end of June, obviously we're kind of just coming out. We're starting to see the light after the, or maybe we're not actually, after the coronavirus. So recently you must have been inundated with messages from teachers, institutions and organizations around the world. What are the kind of the themes of the questions, concerns and requests that are being put to you at the moment?
Yeah, it's quite interesting that as a question because obviously that has been the case, and it's evolved as people have got a little bit more confidence. So at the beginning, it was how does Zoom work, and I had a video I think on Zoom that I think it's been played like about 300,000 times on
Wow.
YouTube,
Wow. Yeah.
and then it's evolved a little bit now. Now people are kind of thinking more about, well, okay, so yeah, I know how the breakout rooms work, but how can I really make an effective lesson making use of the breakout room? So we're beginning to focus a bit more on the pedagogy and a bit less on the kind of emergency of getting online. I mean, we've all got a long way to go. I mean, one of the interesting things as well is that I've learned a lot as well. So yes, I have a background in using tech, but just like everyone else, I've been more thrown into working online than ever before. So it's also been a learning curve for me. So as well as helping other teachers with their journey, I've also been on a journey as well, and that's been really interesting for me.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, just speaking about myself briefly, like in the past 3 months, like if I think back to 3 months ago, not even 3 months ago, in fact, how my kind of thinking has changed and all the experiences I've got from sitting in front of my computer in my office. It's and the conversations that I had with my colleagues 3 months ago and what we're doing now is very different.
Yeah, I think it's moving on. I think, people are focusing a bit more on the pedagogy. We've still got quite a journey to go on. As I said, I'm still learning as well. But yeah, it's kind of interesting to look at where we are now. So, I mean, one of the interesting things at the moment would be the whole, for example, let's imagine that you're teaching online. In the past, most of these publishing companies had these platforms that they developed, and those platforms often provided they provided the content of the book, but along with that they also provided things like videos, the audio files, the option to, for example, to get the students to log in, so that then therefore you had a way of connecting with the students through the platform. Now, those platforms have hardly anyone ever used them because obviously most teachers weren't thinking in that way in terms of the way they were going to deliver their teaching and learning, because they were having face-to-face classes. Those platforms now have suddenly become very interesting, and that is one area that I'm particularly interested in at the moment, because actually I've looked into quite a few of these platforms from various publishers, and some of them are really good. Because you imagine you're teaching an online course, so you've got your Zoom session, and then you're thinking to set the homework for the students to do. If you've got access to that platform, and you can say, right, for homework, I want you to do this, 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 and this, and that's immediately uploaded into the student's profile. So when the student logs into the platform, they can see exactly what the homework is, and the teacher can even check the next day. Well, did the students do the homework? What mark did they get, etc. So these platforms are a really interesting feature that the publishing companies have all developed, some better than others. I think those platforms have got a real future in language teaching.
Right. Yeah. It seems that we've always had this technology to some extent, but it seems like a great deal of us haven't really been thinking about it or using it at all. And yeah, with the power of hindsight, it feels like we should have been, maybe.
Well, I'm not sure, because I'm not even sure that I was kind of advocating the use of things like Edmodo as a platform to use, right? Which is a great platform to use for getting students to do homework. But the difference is, when you use Edmodo, you've got to provide the content. You've got to share the videos. Obviously, there'll be user-generated content that you can make use of, but basically, you're the one who's got to populate the content on the Edmodo system. So Edmodo is a brilliant, support platform for teaching and learning, but you do have to create the content. If you sign up to a publisher's platform, well, all the content for the class is already there.
Yeah, I guess that's the big difference.
Yeah.
Another big difference I was thinking of is, I guess people are kind of conflating the idea of kind of teaching online and emergency remote teaching. What would you say are the differences between like an established online approach that uses these kind of platforms and what the majority of us are doing, where we're kind of adapting very quickly and kind of using makeshift kind of methods?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think there is some truth in that obviously when you're teaching online, at the bottom, at the base of it, there's basically two things. You need a platform for delivering your live learning, what we normally call a virtual classroom, and that could be Zoom, and that could be Microsoft Meet, it could be Google Classroom. It could be tons and tons of tools. There are Blue Jeans. There are so many of them. So you need something for the live session, and then you need a platform where the students go for the homework and do activities and have discussions. So you need some kind of central repository, a place where you're all connected. And what you really want to do if you're teaching online is build an effective connection between those two parts. And it's almost like a flipped classroom. So the best way to make use of the time on the live session is to get the students to do some work in preparation for that, so that when they come in, you can almost immediately get them working in breakout rooms and getting them doing activities. So let's say, for example, I set the homework and say, right, tonight, guys, I want you to watch this video and answer the following questions. So they've watched the video. I come into the next Zoom session. I say, right, guys, hopefully you've all done the homework. I'm going to put you into groups now, and I want you to discuss the following questions based on the video. So bang, straight away, they're into a group-based session. Now, when you get them in breakout rooms, then we've got to learn, how do you organize a breakout room effectively? Funny enough, that's going to be one of the next videos that I'm going to put onto teachertrainingvideos.com. So then it's really making use of those breakout rooms. But what at the core of that is this relationship between the content that students have got access to for homework, and how you link that to what you're going to do in the classroom. And if you do that well, then you can make your lessons quite student-centered, because you can get them into breakout rooms and working with the content. Now, obviously, the lower the level of the student, the harder that is to do. You've also got to learn to be effective in the way that you kind of move around the breakout rooms and check out how the students are working together and facilitating and supporting them. But it can actually mean that you can get away from doing a very teacher-fronted lesson. What a lot of teachers were doing at the beginning was almost replacing what they do in a face-to-face class. So they were literally going online in Zoom and just talking for an hour and maybe playing a video and a little basic amount of interaction with the students. And I've observed quite a lot of classes like that. And obviously you can understand why. Suddenly, but if you've got more time to think about the way you're going to organize your course, then that's essentially what you do. You'd think about the relationship between what you had on online for the students to access with what you're going to do in your Zoom sessions or in your live sessions to maximize particularly maximize the student-centered approach of that part of the lesson.
Yeah, I was thinking about this recently, actually. I was wondering about my own teaching. Am I just trying to replicate what I do in the physical classroom online, or am I making any kind of deeper adjustments to my teaching? And I don't know, I'm kind of somewhere in the middle at the moment. In some ways, I'm not really changing much, but in other ways, I am. And yeah, what should we keep in mind when we are adapting things like this?
Right. So, I mean, I'm also going on that journey. So I wouldn't say that I'm necessarily any different to anyone else. I mean, I might be a little bit further down the line simply because I've been teaching online for much longer. But I mean, what it does essentially get down to is that, as I said, first two things. So first of all, that relationship between what you've asked the students to do for homework, and then how you're going to use that when you get into let's say you're using Zoom, which is obviously what most people are using. Now, that activity that you've asked the students to do at home, that could be them watching a video and answering some questions. It might be them preparing some key points. It might be them producing a set of questions. It could be anything. But what you've got to think of is, what have they done at home and how can you link that into the lesson? So I'll give you an example. Let's say that I've told my students, right, for homework, I want you to watch this video and then I want you to discuss this question in the forum. So there is what we call user-generated content. Okay, this would be a high-level class or high-ish level. So when they come into the Zoom session with me, the perfect thing for me to do is say, right, guys, I'm going to put you into groups. You've all been contributing to the forum. I want you to work through the forum together as a group of students, look at the forum posts, discuss 5 key points that come out of the forum that you think are important. So off they go now in their groups and they're reading the forum. So they're looking at the content that they've generated. And now they've got to extract the key points that have been made. So there's a lot of reading going on. There'll be some discussion as they think of the points. And then presumably one of the students will write those into an interactive whiteboard, write the key points on it, because you have an interactive whiteboard in Zoom. So the reason that that's quite powerful is, A, it means there's lots of student focus. B, you're making use of the content that the students generated at home. So you're not just saying, right, great, that forum was really interesting. No, you're actually using it for the next part of the lesson. And C, you're making the lesson really focused, because you're saying, right, I want you to read the forum and I want you to make 5 points. Now, what I do is when I move them into breakout rooms, number one, I tell them to turn off their webcams, because what I want them to do is to open up the interactive whiteboard so that they can then write the key points out. Number two, I teach them how they can screen share different things, because when you're working in Zoom, for example, you can be screen sharing, say, an interactive whiteboard, but you can also click at the top and say new share and screen share something else. So they've got to learn to be able to jump between looking at the forum and then jumping back to the interactive whiteboard so they can write their answers together. So you actually have to train the students a little bit in using technology as well. That's also a really important tip when you're going to try to make the most out of the breakout rooms. But number 3, and this is really useful for the teacher, if the students are working in breakout rooms and you've given them a specific task and therefore they're writing onto the interactive whiteboard. Now, if you've told them all to turn off their webcams, and I've also turned mine off as the teacher, when I come into the room, because they're working on the interactive whiteboard software and they're adding up their ideas onto it, they don't even know that I'm in the room, because we've not got our webcams on. So I can listen and I can see, right, they're working really well on the project, they're on the task. So I don't necessarily need to spend too much time with that group. I might go into it and then so I disappear. I don't even tell them I've came in the room. Or I might at the end say, well done, guys, you're working well together. I'm leaving now. And then they often laugh because they realise that I was in the room listening. Then I go off to another group and I see that this group hasn't written anything. Right, now I know I need to intervene. Guys, what's going on here? You haven't written anything up yet. Yeah, don't forget what I told you. I want 5 key points that have come out of the forum discussion. So one thing I am saying, you've got to be really organised in the way you think through the activities that the students are going to do when they're in breakout rooms. It's almost got to be a task. You've really got to give them something specific to do. And I always nominate a leader, and that leader, or they can nominate themselves, is the person who's responsible for writing up the key points. Because when you bring them back into the main room, you then want them, of course, to discuss. You ask each leader, right, what did you discuss? Or what did you think? And that way, again, it's very student generated. It's not the teacher doing the work. So it was just, I got better and better. I just was teaching a course at King's College University, and we were doing 4 hours of Zoom a week in just one class. So I really had to be imaginative with the time. And I got better and better at doing this. And towards the end, because I wasn't so good at the beginning, the lessons were too teacher-fronted. But towards the end, some of the lessons, I was hardly, it was all them. I was just basically bringing all the key points together at the end. I would often say, right, guys, we've discussed this. You've done it in groups. You've now summarised your key points to the rest of the class. I'm just going to highlight some of the key points that have come out of the discussion. And my part would often be at the end to kind of just bring it all together. So you're really facilitating the learning. Now, is that as good as teaching in a face-to-face context? No, it's not. You never get me saying that. You never get me saying that teaching online is as good as a blended learning where, I've got some content online, but then I also meet them face-to-face. But it's not bad. You can do a pretty good job. That's all I can say, really.
Yeah. There's a lot of things that I want to pick up on. Yeah, so it seems... I guess variety is something that should be offered to the learners, not just having everything live, speaking directly to the learners all the time, giving them time away from the computer or away from the class to complete activities in a flipped approach kind of way, and then make sure you kind of maximize the time spent together in Zoom. Would that be correct?
Yeah, so Matthew, that brings up two massive questions. Number one, the whole area of student autonomy. Students be learning to become more independent in the way they learn. Because if you are actually asking them to be more responsible for their learning at two levels. Firstly, at the level of interacting with the content that you've set up for homework, all right, and them becoming responsible learners. And number two, them having a certain knowledge of how Zoom works so they can also, get engaged in your lessons. Because if you don't get the cooperation of the students, they don't know how to screen share. They don't know how to jump from screen sharing, one screen to screen sharing another. They don't know how to write the key points down on an interactive whiteboard. They don't know how to save their interactive whiteboard so that when they come back into the main room, they can open it up and share it with you. There are lots of skills they've got to have. And that brings up a question. Where is all this stuff then about these supposed students who are really good with technology? We often hear the Gen Y and Gen this and Gen that. I bring that into question a little bit. I reckon some students are pretty good with technology, but I've also seen plenty of students that aren't.
Yeah, for me, maybe Japan's different to other places, but it seems like a whole generation has kind of skipped the computer and they're doing everything on their smartphone these days. And I really had to kind of in my initial classes, I really had to kind of check what the students were using for the classes, because some of them you could see that they were just on their smartphones and they didn't have access to the other documents that I was sending them and things. And
brilliant point, Matthew. I mean, that is massive. So again, I'm sticking to my guns on that one. They've got to tech up. They've got to have. I mean, obviously, if we're talking about countries where there's obviously, that aren't that wealthy and where it could really be a problem in terms of they simply couldn't afford to buy a laptop. I can understand to a degree, but it is a massive point. The experience of using a telephone, a smartphone, in terms of the online delivery of a course, it's just not the same user experience as if they're on a laptop or on a desktop. So in some contexts where I understand that people haven't got access to the internet and maybe haven't got access to computers, I understand that we've got to do our best with mobiles. But if we're talking about the West, you can buy a Chromebook for $100 odd pounds. They're not particularly expensive, I even know that some governments or organizations, universities are even thinking about, well, do they need to facilitate computers to make sure that students have really got access to the computers because of how important that is in terms of the learning experience.
Yeah, I know. Speaking about Japan, some universities are subsidizing or giving students kind of grants with this kind of software or hardware as well. One of a couple of conversations I've had with my colleagues is how we kind of have to assume to an extent that the internet is going to cut out at any minute, or the students might not have access to laptops. So how can we keep in mind this when we're delivering our lessons? Is there any way to kind of ensure kind of accessibility for everyone? Is that really possible?
I'm not sure if it is really possible, but there are a few things that you can do. I've sometimes been a bit shocked, for example, when I've been working with some organisations and everyone's got their webcam open. When you're like, I mean, yeah, okay, great, it's lovely. You're all on screen, but actually that's going to slow down the experience, especially when we move into breakout rooms. So getting people to learn, who needs their webcam on? Well, normally the speaker does. And if someone asking a question. So there is a sort of way of just facilitating the whole process of working in, say, technologies like Zoom, and thinking about, so I'll start a session and say to everyone, well, look, please, can you turn off your webcams? Because, I'm going to be screen sharing. I'm going to put you into breakout rooms, and it's going to affect the quality of the way the whole thing works. Just silly little things like that will make a difference. Even turning off your audio, audio files, webcams, and screen sharing, all of those are internet heavy. So you want to be using them to the minimum, only when they're really necessary. Now, turning on the webcam can be necessary at certain key points, but the rest of the time, turn it off. There's no need for it. I even see it when I'm having meetings at university and everyone's got their webcam on. I mean, they're not doing anything on the webcam. You can see all these people there and you're thinking, well, and I can notice sometimes that, the audio quality isn't that good. And I think, well, why don't we just turn our webcams off? And the audio quality is bound to improve. So just silly things like that will make a difference. But don't get me wrong, it is a struggle, and I've had that problem. I've been working with groups of students, and some of them have struggled to have access. There's something I've done recently, so you got me onto something here, Matthew, where I've had people say, contacting me, oh, blah, blah, blah. I said, right, here's a speed test. Just tell me what the speed of your computer is. And they've got back to me and said, oh, it says that it's 5 megabytes per second. Or something like that. And I'm just saying, well, I'm just going to tell you what my one is. Mine's over 100 megabytes per second. You've got to understand that you've got to be responsible a bit for your own technology. You're always complaining, saying, well, I can't access. I know it's a difficult one because they've all been thrust into the situation. But people do need to be aware of this. They do need to be aware that, this is the context that we're working in now. And again, I'm always talking about Western context. I do totally understand that in other contexts it's very difficult. But where we have got access to money and we have got access to the internet, I guess we've got to take some responsibility ourselves to make sure that we've got a decent connection, that we'll be able to really get the full experience out of learning.
If we were to do things in a kind of asynchronous manner, where there isn't any live element, you're producing materials for the students. What kind of approaches would you take in that respect? If we kind of remove the speed of the internet and the audio and the video, what kind of approaches would you take in delivering asynchronous materials?
And I think it's a good point. And I think, as things stand at the moment, that may be the way to go. So some of the organisations I'm working with, including the universities, are kind of looking at that for next year. So they're saying, yes, look, this internet situation, because of the connectivity, etc., and because of even people's access to technology, we're going to make more of the learning asynchronous. Again, we come back then to the point of students becoming more responsible for their own learning, etc. But maybe, again, those Zoom sessions are reduced to a minimum and you try to maximize the use of them, and therefore you provide a lot more learning content online. Now, if you do that, you need it to be well organized, super clear. You need to stop this thing of dumping, which is something else that happens a lot, particularly at university level, where teachers share loads and loads of links to loads of things that really are irrelevant to the course. You want a really streamlined, super clear course, and you want to make sure there's lots of teacher presence in it. What do I mean by that? I want to make sure that there's plenty of you in it. So you need videos of you explaining things where you're on the screen, or at least they can hear your voice. Teacher presence becomes a big thing when a course is predominantly asynchronous. And I think that is the way to go for a lot of organizations, even universities, because of this connectivity problem. So yeah, you might have a limited number of Zoom sessions, probably fewer than you would face-to-face contact. You therefore make the most of the asynchronous, but you make sure it's well organized, it's all relevant, it's well structured, it's easy to navigate around, and there is the feeling that you're part of the course, and you can do that through using screen capture technologies like Snagit, Camtasia, Screencast-O-Matic, that sort of thing, where you can record your lectures or record your presentations, and therefore the students still feel that they've got contact with the teacher. That's a really important part of an asynchronous course.
Yeah, that's something I've really enjoyed, actually, doing or recording presentations for my students. And then, although I kind of feel like it's kind of easier work for me, because where I record one video once and it's a very kind of polished and not so much edited, but I've practiced it a few times, I can use that same video for multiple lessons. So it does seem a bit of a cop-out on for me, but the students seem to prefer that in some respects.
Yeah, Matthew, the only problem is, right, particularly because, like you, I'm really involved in language teaching. Yeah, I mean, I tend to work outside of the language teaching domain these days often as well. But generally, I'm still, working. Is that obviously we know that language learning is also about actually using the language. We know that communication is a key point. And this is a bit of a problem. There are other subject matters where possibly you could reduce the number of Zoom sessions and still do a fairly good course. It is a bit more difficult in language learning because so much of the responsibility of actually practicing the language is part of the lesson itself, isn't it? That's a very, I'm a bit of a, I'm not a very good language learner, but I actually have lessons every single day in a language. So, Spanish and French, which are quite good level. Now I study Polish, which is still at a really low level, but there's no getting away from it. Despite the fact that in all of those languages, I've got access to a platform with great content on it, which I do make use of. The most rewarding times are those times when I'm connected with a teacher and I'm actually practicing and activating my knowledge and using it. And that's the problem. How do we overcome that? Well, if we go for a kind of asynchronous approach to learning.
Yeah, there are some good questions. Yeah, before you go, and I know you've got other meetings to go to, I just want to touch on one or two more topics, if that's okay.
Yeah.
And you mentioned screen capture software or screen capture technology, and I know this is one of your interests. So I wonder, could you briefly explain what this is to the unfamiliar, and then talk us through how this technology is good for, or how does it enhance the process of feedback giving?
Aha, great. Well, I'm glad you jumped onto that because it's always that's my main thing. That's really the thing that really took this all off. So screen capture is the ability to record what's on the screen of your computer. Okay, so if I've got anything on my screen, whether it be a picture, whether it be a document, whether it be a graph, I can click on a button and I can record myself talking over that document and turn it into a learning asset. So let's say, for example, I've got a picture of Henry VIII open on the screen. Well, I could turn on the screen capture software and record myself talking about Henry VIII, and suddenly I would have a video with a picture of Henry VIII plus the speaking. Now, I was really lucky. I used to always snoop around and look into these technologies, and in about 2006, I saw this technology for the first time. It had already been around for a while, but hardly anyone was using it then. And I thought to myself, well, hang on a minute, then can't that technology be used for feedback? So if the students send me their work, surely I can open it up on the screen, mark the problems on the screen, turn on the screen capture technology, and just record myself talking through their work and giving them tips, and then send them back that video. And in fact, that's how I won all those awards, the one from the Times Higher and the British Council. It's all really based on that work. And that whole idea really, really took off. And that's still, for me personally, the thing that I'm most interested in. And it's something that I do all the time in all the courses I work on. When my students are working with me, they get screen capture feedback at the key moments. I don't use it every single day, but often if I'm giving, say, because most of my students are going to be teachers. They're working on master's degree programs with me. I might give them feedback on their lit review, or I might give them feedback on their plan for their dissertation. Those sorts of things I would be using screen capture feedback. And that idea has really taken off. Now, the reason that technology is so interesting is because actually that's the same technology, this ability to record yourself talking over anything that's on the screen of your computer. That's the same technology that's used for the flipped classroom. That's the same technology that's being used for building online courses. That's the same technology that we use for making content when we build asynchronous content. So for me, it's still probably the most important technology in education. There are many of these products about, but I absolutely love it. I use it all the time. My website is built on it. All the videos on my website are built using screen capture technology. I literally wake up in the morning and open up the screen capture technology and just have it there because I know I'm going to be using it, 5-6 times a day minimum.
Right,
so it's it really is. I'm obviously not saying the right thing when I say it's the number one technology in education, because obviously it isn't. There are other things that, for me personally, it is.
And when you say giving feedback, for example, the students have submitted an essay, a written essay, so they can see you highlighting parts, and they can also hear you kind of expressing your feedback too at the same time.
It's absolutely brilliant, Matthew. It really is, because, you can get so much detail into the feedback. What I've learned about it over the years, because obviously when I first did it, despite the fact that it did generate loads of publicity for me, I wasn't really doing it that effectively. I was giving too much feedback on too many different things. When we give feedback, we've really got to think about it in terms of learning. So, this is that student. This is a student. This is obviously where they're at. I'm going to give you 5 pieces of advice to help you to framework, we're talking about Vygotski's zone of proximal development, framework and help you to move on. So, what I've learned now is, let's imagine you're my student. You send me your essay. I open it on the screen. I might read it once first. I'll mark 5 key points that I want to talk about. I'll then turn on the screen capture technology and start talking through them. So, right, Matthew, I just want to talk about this here. You've not got that quite right. Can you think about blah, blah, blah? Or Matthew, this point here is not that clear. All right. And then I make that video and then I send it to you. So it's fast. It's super clear for you because you can see the screen, you can see the video, and you can see that I've got your work open up. You can see the things I've highlighted, and you can listen to me giving you the comments, and then you can then use that to redraft your essay. I can't exaggerate how much I'm using this technology, and also the incredible feedback that I get from the students that, because people still don't know about it. Even, imagine that I wrote that. The first article I ever wrote was in the Modern English Teacher in 2006. I'll tell you a funny story really quickly because I had so much publicity. The company whose software I was using, they phoned me from America and said, what's this about this software you're using to give feedback? And I said, I'm using it to give feedback. They said, but it's not made for that. It's made for training teachers in training people in using computers. I said, but it's perfect for feedback. And they said to me, well, we don't really understand. We've seen that you're in the newspaper. You've been on the telly. They said to me, will you come over to America and present it to us? I said, okay. So I flew out to America and I showed them what I was doing. It just shows you how powerful that software is, that even the company or one of the companies that was developing that software were not even aware that you could use it for that. Yeah. Now they are, of course. Yeah.
Actually, to be honest, feedback is one of the areas of my job that I kind of dislike, and I don't really engage with the most. So maybe this is something I need to try myself.
I would really encourage you to do it, Matthew. You might even find it literally becomes the thing that you like the most, because I would totally agree. I look forward to the reaction I'm going to get from most of my students when I give them video feedback. I'll tell you now, for example, I've got a course that I'm just finished running with Niall, and it was on helping teachers to take their teaching online. We had thousands of students do it, but if they wanted to, because it was completely free, they could do an assignment. And if they did the assignment, the promise was that I would give them video feedback. So, and there were hundreds of people that did this. So each one of those has been getting video feedback from me. I promise you, nearly all of them email me back afterwards to say, wow, that's amazing. What a way of giving me feedback on my work. Because I'm basically opening up their lesson plans. I'm reading them through, marking the key points I want to make, turning on screen capture software and just recording myself saying, right, okay, love your starter. What a great idea. What a great warmer. But look at the here. And just I'm going through the lesson plans and giving them some tips. Again, I try to limit it to maybe 4 or 5 key points. And then I'm uploading that video onto YouTube. I'm making it unlisted, so it's private. And I send them the link. And then they can just click and listen to me going through their lesson plans and giving them some tips on how to improve them.
Yeah, it's a great idea. Yeah. Just to bring everything together now, I guess obviously the events that kind of brought us to this kind of situation are quite unfortunate. However, there's of course lots of opportunities as well. How can we ensure that all these experiments that teachers are trying out now, how can we make sure that they're kind of maintained and built upon and carried over to when we kind of return to the new normal times, I guess, or more normal kind of situation?
Well, I think always at the heart of everything when we're working is, first of all, we're teachers. We know about pedagogy, and that doesn't change whether you're teaching in a face-to-face environment or you're teaching online. You've always got to remember your key rules about language learning, particularly. Yeah? So when I'm working in, I'm not doing many language classes these days, but if I was still in that situation, I would be thinking always about the same things that I always thought about even when I was in the class. How can I maximize the amount of opportunities for them to speak, to motivate them to speak, etc. And so you're at the end of the day, it's just using different tools, but with the same basic principles behind them about what you want to achieve in terms of their learning. I don't think that changes massively. I think one thing that could be interesting for the future is obviously lots of teachers now are learning about technology, because a lot of teachers are teaching fully online. One day, hopefully, we'll go back to a blended approach, and perhaps that will actually mean a different focus on the part of the teachers, because they'll be much more aware now of technologies that they can use to support what they're doing in the classroom. For me, the most powerful type of learning is a blended learning, where you are maximizing because the thing that always fascinated me about technology right from the start was how could it improve what I was doing outside of the classroom. Because if I was in the class with a group of students and I was using all the creative content that we've got in ELT, making use of all the photocopyable materials, I always remember I was in love with the content from Mario Rinvolucri and from Jill Hatfield, English File, all the photocopies in the back of the ball by Paul Seglerson. All of that stuff always meant that the lessons themselves I was always pretty happy with. They were a lot of fun. I didn't really need to bring a lot of technology into the lesson, but what I was always disappointed with was what I could get students to do outside of the classroom. Whereas I think now, and especially as teachers have got more knowledge of using technology, they'll be thinking much more, can I make my homework more interesting? Can I make perhaps use of the platform that goes with the book, or different activities that maybe my students can do for homework now, using Google Forms, using Padlet, making better use of the content that's in YouTube and linking it to some type of activity that you want them to do. So hopefully that's one thing that's really going to come out of teaching and learning in the future. When we go back to blended learning, you're going to have a lot of teachers that know a lot more about technology. Edmodel, for example, if you've learned to use Edmodel while teaching online, well, what a brilliant tool to use when you're teaching in a blended learning context.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I'll make sure to provide some of the links to these, to your website, of course, and to some of these applications in the podcast description as well.
Brilliant.
Okay, Russell. So I guess we'll leave it there. So thanks for talking to me today.
Yeah, it was a real pleasure. Lovely questions.
We'd like to thank Russell Stannard again for his appearance on this episode. If you'd like to learn more about Russell, you can visit teachertrainingvideos.com or his personal website, russellstannard.com. You can also find a variety of videos by Russell on his YouTube channel, Russell Stannard Teacher Training Videos. Links to all of these are in the description of this episode. For more interviews with leading figures in ELT and for further information about the podcast, please visit TEFLology-podcast.com. To get in touch with us, you can send an email to TEFLology@gmail.com, or you can visit our Facebook page or our Twitter page @TEFLology. We'll be back with another episode soon.